Right, welcome back. I had to take a break. I couldn't read anymore. It was just so sad, really. Okay, supply rate. I kept thinking about David. If he survived, we'd have nothing to treat his wound with, so I needed to get some medicine first. There was a pharmacy not far from my house. I decided to look there and check the abandoned houses along the way. Indeed, I managed to find some food and water there. Did that make me a looter? I hope not. I didn't want to think of myself as one, so I made an effort to remember which things I took and where. This way I could compensate my neighbors after the war. As expected, the pharmacy had been ransacked. Shattered windows, racks turned over, and broken cash registers. The Russians had already liberated the place and even threw themselves a little party, it seemed. On the floor I saw empty bottles of ethanol. Eventually, I did find an unopened bottle of ethanol. It rolled under a rack, and I was the first one to find it. In the back, I found bandages and antibiotics. Thanking the Almighty for such great luck, I packed everything into my backpack and hurried back home. As I walked back home, the fighting resumed, and judging by the sound, it was headed my way. I sped up to the best of my abilities. A few times, the explosions would ring out a single street away from me, making the ground shake under my feet. I wanted to drop the supplies I found and run and try to run, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. I couldn't come back empty-handed. When I finally reached my home safely, I couldn't believe my luck. It was already getting dark outside. My leg was on fire, and my back was killing me. But Lily's adoring gaze made up for any discomfort. Her look made me feel like a young man in his prime again. For the first time in forever, I felt useful. Mobile connection was down more often than it was not, and even then, we had to go outside to catch any. But even so, the gossip spread quickly around Hostomel. The fighting had died down and the Russians had the free run of town. And that's when the news started coming in. News I didn't want to believe. People said a man was shot for not showing the Russians his phone. Another man did show him this, and the Russians shot him over something they found in it. Another man was shot for wearing camouflage pants. Another for asking the soldiers what they were doing in Ukraine. I didn't know what to think of it. I didn't want to believe it. Most of the soldiers in the village were barely adults, yet those who shot David and Mirsoyan were barely adults too. And every night we heard more gunshots. And every night we heard women screaming. Poor Milena was terrified. She kept beating herself up over heading to Hostomel before the war. Kiev, we were told, was still holding out, but Hostomel, as we'd soon find out, Hostomel was lost. One evening, we sat huddled in the basement. Me, Olga, Lily, and Milena, who hid in the farthest corner. Fearing the worst, we were always ready to hide her under the blankets if she wasn't there. And the Russians were rowdy that evening. Their gunfire and frenzied shouting echoed across the town. Suddenly we heard someone bang on the door, and mere seconds later it flew open. Milena hid herself immediately, and the rest of us jumped to our feet. We heard commotion coming from upstairs, from someone's slow and messy descent. A Russian. When he stumbled into the basement, I recoiled from the stench of sweat and alcohol. He could barely stand as he looked at us. His sleepy blue eyes were almost white.
Good evening. So, what's gonna be?
He slurred. as if continuing a point he made before, somewhere upstairs, if not hours ago. There any girls left in this town? My heart sank. Lily and Olga just blinked at each other. The man stood at the exit, trapping us inside. His rifle was at his shoulder, way out of our reach. Then he moved across the basement, towards the bedding where Milena was hiding. My heart sank. Luckily, Lilia spoke up. What are you celebrating? I was baffled at first, but then I too put the dots together. The smell of alcohol and the shouts outside. The soldier was already barely standing when he came to us. As it turned out, that's why he went for the bedding, to land onto it with a loud, tired groan. I couldn't breathe from strain. Milena was barely a meter away from him, hidden under a pile of blankets. We took Hostomel. We took everything at Kiev. It's next. Soon your president... He grinned through his thumb across his dirt-caked neck. Him and the rest of the fucking Nazis. Way to keep the boy distracted and get him to leave us alone as soon as possible. Good. All the rest of those Nazis, my Lily chirped. Just be careful, boys. You must have someone waiting for you back home, right? Parents, really? Do you have siblings? I chimed in. The boy was neither intelligent nor well-spoken, but we listened to every word. When he was done answering, we asked more questions. The stories he told us were awful. The boy didn't seem to come from a happy household, and his home village somewhere in North Russia was sparse on young women. He said he was conscripted a year ago and wasn't even supposed to be in Ukraine, but he was having the time of his life. Say wherever you want, eat whatever you want, fuck local girls, show it every once in a while. When I go back, they'll give me a medal for it. He grinned. I wanted to strangle him. Our talk lasted for so long I was afraid Milena would suffocate under all the blankets or give herself away. But she did well. She later told us she was shaken the whole time, but I didn't notice. I believe I lost several kilograms from sheer stress, but finally the boy seemed to forget what he came to us for. Just then, we heard someone else walk through the open basement door. Another Russian. He too was armed. Sari, get the fuck up. Sarge is looking for you. What the fuck are you even doing here? Finding some girls for the night? Like yesterday. How the fucking sergeant where I was going? The man got on his feet, grumbling under his breath. I winced at their cross-exchange, but said nothing. This wasn't the time or place to tell youngsters to mind their language. Thankfully, the soldiers were about to leave anyway. Wow. Leave these fat old hacks alone, you idiot. We found someone younger. Oh dear. That was close. It was the second week of war. 2 days ago, an artillery shell hit the substation on the street next to ours, and since then we had no electricity. To cook or boil water, I had to build a fire in our backyard. Olga and Milena was fixing to try and evacuate. I'm telling you, there won't be a better time. What if the Russians come back to look for goals again? We won't be so lucky a second time. After that case, Milena wouldn't leave the basement anymore. She shuddered at any noise. No matter how she tried to hide it, I knew she was having nightmares. I didn't sleep well either. Memories of that evening kept surfacing. The mere thought of what would happen if the drunk Russian found Milena made me sick to my stomach. We were lucky our Katya left for leave a long time ago. The Russians would never reach it there. I thank God for it every day. Oh yeah, we talked about it. It's too dangerous. Those Russians are firing at any car they see. Lily was against doing anything rash. She insisted that we wait for the official evacuation corridor. The problem was we didn't know if or when there would be any. It can't possibly be more dangerous than staying here, Olga insisted. She was always a good mother to Milena, and after David's death, I could understand her feelings. Living in constant fear for your child. Wouldn't wish it on my worst enemy. If you want to sit and wait, that's fine. But we are leaving today. The conversation was over, and the Mirsoyans went to pack up their things. In about an hour, they were ready to leave. We went out into the yard, not knowing what to say or do. It was a strange feeling, looking at our friends and wondering if we'd see them ever again. In the last few weeks, the Mirsoyans became like family to us. Shared hardship made us close. We hugged them and said our goodbyes. Lily hurried back into the basement. I think she didn't want me to see her tears. She became quite fond of Milena. I thought I'd miss her too. Our days would even be darker without her occasional smile. We were both too sad to do anything in the evening, so we went to sleep early. And in the morning we were woken up by loud screams from the outside. It was Milena. She was calling for help. Me and Lily ran out into the yard and saw her. She was barely standing on her feet, holding up her mother, whose clothes were stained with blood. Olga looked pale, and her left arm hung limp along her body. Oh my, Milena, what happened? Lily rushed to help the crying girl. I limped right after to support Olga. My leg hurt like hell, but it was the last of my concerns at the time. There was a Russian BTR. They fired on us. The girl was in shock and barely stringed words together. There's bodies on the street with tied hands, like they were executed. Shoulders shook as she balled into her hands. Me and Lily exchanged shocked glances. We heard gunfire every night. We couldn't even imagine something like this. My wife came to her senses first. Blosha, bring her downstairs. I have to take a look at her wound. Back in the basement, we put Olga down on a mattress and turned on a flashlight to see what we were dealing with. That's when Lydia's first aid courses came in handy. Lyosha, get the medkit. We must clean and dress the wound. Watching Lily work, I try to calm Milena down. Don't worry, honey. Mom will be alright. We have the medicine. It will help. Good. Good. It's been a few days since Olga was wounded. She was in the clutches of fever. Lily kept by her side, keeping a cold rag on her forehead. It barely helped. Olga needed medicine and professional medical help. At some point, I even tried pleading with the Russians, asking if they could help. They just laughed and said they wouldn't waste medicine on us, even if they had enough of it themselves. From the looks of it, their special military operation against Ukraine wasn't going according to plan. What little news we kept getting suggested that the Russians weren't making any progress. Our military stopped their advance completely, and the recruitment stations had civilians queuing up to them. People said there were more Ukrainian volunteers than weapons to give them. Despite constant rocket strikes and shellings of peaceful cities, Ukraine held fast. But those weren't all the news. For the last few days, rumors had begun to spread about another occupied town nearby. Bucha. What the Russians did to its citizens was beyond my comprehensions. Even the Nazi occupation from my father's occasional stories couldn't compare to the senseless cruelty of the Russian military. And the ones in Hostomel keep telling us that they came to liberate their brother people. So far, mass murder, torture and rape were all I'd seen or heard about the Russian world they were so eager to bring us into. Back home, I saw Lily and Milena having a cup of tea and talking about something. After all the stress she's been through, Milena spoke with a stammer and cried more often than not. Bubbly and full of life before the war. Now, Milena was a shadow of her former self. Luckily, my wife had worked with children her entire life, being a schoolteacher. Milena wasn't a child, but Lily still managed to get through to her, like she always did to anyone. Now, Lily was telling Milena a funny story about her own daughter. And as it turned out, she spent the night at her friend's house. You don't understand. We had the entire town looking for her. And she just had the sound on her phone disabled. Oh, children. Milena smiled a little. It was her first smile since the incident with her mother. I was glad to see her coming back to life, bit by bit. I smiled at the story as well and checked my phone. It suddenly had a weak connection. Any time I caught any, I tried to keep up with the news. And I couldn't believe my eyes when I saw it. Evacuation! Lily! An official evacuation from Hostomel. The basement went quiet. Lily and Milena looked up at me with round eyes, and even Olga seemed to perk up a little. Tomorrow at noon, there will be an evacuation corridor for civilians, either by car or by bus. They'll be waiting at the outskirts of town. Milena looked at her mother, then at me. We're going, right? Mom needs to see a doctor. Me and Lilia exchanged glances. Leaving a house behind was scary, but we couldn't stay. Especially after the news from Bucha. We immediately had a silent understanding. Lily stroked Milena on the head. Of course, honey. Tomorrow night we'll all be safe. The rest of the day was spent packing up for departure, and by morning we were ready. We decided to go by car. That way we'd be able to take more supplies and get to our destination faster. In times of war, transport could become an issue, and with my leg reaching the evacuation buses with an injured woman in tow, we ran the risk of not making it. We loaded everything up into the car and looked at our house for the last time. We've lived there for the better of our lives, and leaving it behind was tough. Mirsoyans had it even worse. They weren't only leaving their home in Hostomel, they were leaving David. We set out with a heavy heart. The ruined and looted Hostomel outside was a scene straight from a horror movie. On the outskirts, we passed a Russian checkpoint. They checked our papers and looked inside the car, but decided to let us through. Soon, we joined the evacuation convoy on the highway, and I began to feel the dread. A constant companion of the last 2 weeks dissipate. We're safe, at last. I could scarcely remember the road to Kiev. I think the entire time we were on the road I kept looking out of the window, and the only thing I remembered were destroyed Russian vehicles. A lot of them. A whole damn lot. At a certain point, I was so overcome by anger, I wanted to limp my way back to Hostomel and strangle every single one responsible for my town's ruin. But this anger passed quickly when I looked Lily, Olga, and Milena peaceful at long last. For the first time in 2 weeks, we had nothing to fear. In Kiev, we immediately took Olga to the hospital. As it turned out, Lily learned a lot from her first aid courses. She did a good job cleaning and dressing the wound. Olga was on the way to her recovery. While we sat at the hospital, Milena found us a train schedule, and in the evening we were already at the railway station. We had to wait for a bit, but eventually we managed to board an evacuation train headed west. It was a long journey, about 13 hours in a cramped train car, but it was nothing compared to what we'd already survived by then. Next day we were in Lviv, where our Katya met us along with her fiancé. I don't think I have ever been happier. My wife and daughter held each other and cried. Sorry. While I looked at the passing cars and people walking around with their children, I couldn't believe my eyes. We were in a peaceful city. We were safe at last. Epilogue. The town of Hostomel fell under attack from the first day of the war. Its Antonov International Airport made it the prime target of the invasion, as it would have allowed the Russian army to continuously airdrop personnel and vehicles to the outskirts of Kiev. By the time the Russians managed to take the airport, it was rendered inoperable. Russian troops first set foot in Hostomel on February 25, 2022, but encountered fierce resistance. By March 5, however, the towns of Hostomel and Bucha were under complete occupation. This put the Russian military in position to threaten the city of Kiev. Only the heroic defense of the Ukrainian armed forces prevented the disaster. Hostomel would only be liberated on April 2. Over the full month of occupation, the Russian armed forces have committed a large number of war crimes, including looting, summary execution, forced deportation, and rape. These events have been corroborated by satellite footage, eyewitness accounts, and intercepted communications. The actions of the Russian troops are considered to be a genocide. The exact number of victims is still being established. Officially, over 400 people from Hostomel remain missing. As of May 2022, the Kiev Oblast has been completely liberated and people are starting to return. But in the south and the east, the war continues. The end is not currently in sight. Oh dear. Oh dear. That was heavy. I choked a few times. I'm sure you've noticed that. I don't know what to say, honestly. It's depressing. Anyway, thank you so much for watching, for listening. Do you want me to play the other chapters as well? Let me know, please. Thanks for watching. I'm the Gaming Cat Dad. See you soon.